So let's begin. I would firstly thank Richard for inviting me for this talk. Today we are going to speak about performance and search engine optimization in your Angular application using Angular Universal. So here is the link for GitHub repo. If you want to see all the code changes that I would be doing, you can find all of them in that repository if you want to follow. Here is something about me. I just said that I'm a software architect at TextNet. I'm also an open source contributor. I contribute to a lot of open source contributions. I have recently helped with Codelyzer, which is a linter that every Angular CLI project uses, and I have added accessibility linting rules in it. And currently, with my Angular expertise, I'm also currently actively writing a book called Angular Projects. Here is a chart that I'm showing about user experience. Basically, as a web developers, web architects, we create applications that has to be good for user experience. We want it to be, our users to be delightful when they use our application. And when we talk about user experience, we normally talk about design, wireframing, etc. But it also entails a lot of things that developers have to focus. Things like accessibility, performance, security, interactivity of the application, shareability of how your applications will be shared with others, discoverability of your application. So let's speak about performance a bit. So here is one of the case study that was done by AliExpress, where they saw a 10% increase in their orders and 27% increase in conversions of the new users when they reduced the load time by 36%. So that's an incredible result that AliExpress saw with the performance improvements. Another was done by Google here. They saw that 53% of their users, the mobile users, abandoned the website if it didn't load in 3 seconds. So it's really important that we have to focus on performance. And to discuss about performance, first we need to understand how rendering happens. So this is how we used to make websites, right? We started out with server-side rendering, where for each page request, we used to construct the whole content of the website in the server, connect with our databases, create that content of HTML, send it back to the browser, and then get all the assets required, and then render your page. And in such cases, routing is again handled on the server side. So all this operation has to happen again when the route changes. So there are a lot of advantages of this approach in a way that your page loads are faster. Like it doesn't have to, your assets are particularly defined for that pages. So you don't define you don't load a lot of JavaScript ahead of time. So, but the disadvantages of this is like when you have interactivity between different pages, you won't have it because every single time your URL changes, the whole interaction will again start from server and then begin.
We're talking about JSP.
JSP, PHP, etc. Right. And then we went for client-side rendering. We used Angular. We are using React, etc. Where we are creating single-page applications. But the thing here, what we do is for the first initial request, we send an empty HTML. Like the HTML does not have the content of the whole application in it for that particular page. And then we send the assets, but these assets has a lot of JavaScript and a lot of CSS for all the different pages. And then we render the page and then make XHR request and then display our content. But the benefit of this approach is that any other redirects to any other different page, you don't have to go back to server because your business logic and routing is already loaded in your JavaScript. You basically, your page transition is fast and you just have to call a small API request and get the data. So looking at this client-side rendering, the initial load has an issue where you are including a lot of JavaScript, but then you are also getting no full page reloads on when you go from page to page, and then you have rich interactivity that you can add using JavaScript. So this is what happens in JavaScript. Like when you include all of your JavaScript in one single bundle, your page size increases and your application for like on slow devices like mobile gets slower, and then it's a very bad user experience. So here is one experiment that was done by Adi Usmani. Adi Usmani is a Google Chrome developer. He experimented with this JavaScript and an image file. He took a similar size image and a JPEG JavaScript file of 170 KB. He on a 3G network and a Moto G4 device. He saw that both of them were downloaded at the similar time, like 3.4 seconds, but the time for parsing and compilation plus execution was way larger. So here you can see it's 3.5 seconds. And when it compares to image decoding and rasterizing, it's way, way larger. So we have to understand that JavaScript is very expensive resource. And to solve this, we can do some things, right? What we do normally is we take the whole bundle and use code splitting. We split our whole bundle into different pages or different components and then load it whenever required. So this is really important, and Angular gives this capability by using lazy load routes. So instead of including a component here, you can just include uh, the destination for the route module and then the module name. And then there's other things that you can do. Suppose if your page has a lot of content, like one single page has a lot of content where you have different tabs, different model pop-up, etc., without routes changing, then you can use something called lazy loading modules, where you can use some library called ngx-loadable, which I created. You can read more about it on that blog post that I wrote introducing Angular loadable, or you can use some other community-driven library called lazy-saf, where you can define the path and the module name, and you can still use that.
So this is, you talk about lazy loading without routing?
Yeah.
So there's a, you did a library for that?
What is it?
You did a library for that?
I did that library, and this is another different library that.
ngx loadable?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe another time we can talk about it. But
Sure.
That's okay.
And then there's another approach that we can use is by pre-shaking our JavaScript. Pre-shaking is basically this concept where you take your JavaScript and pre-shake it and remove all the unused items from your JavaScript. So this can reduce your JavaScript initial bundle size. One approach that you can use is by analyzing your bundle. So these are two different tools called Source Map Explorer and Webpack Bundle Analyzer. These are the commands that you can use without adding anything to your Angular project. So just look at those commands, just run in your projects and see where you can improve and where you can remove JavaScript from your bundle. So for your existing Angular CLI projects, you can run these commands, either this or this, and then you'll get a report like that. So this report that you see is a Webpack bundle analyzer, where it shows that what JavaScript is included in your bundle. Like, if you are including Lodash, so it will show you what methods and how much size of Lodash is being included, and how much RxJS is being included. Are you including the whole RxJS, or are you just including the parts that you are using in your application? So you can analyze your bundle in much detailed way.
I thought there's also another way to do it from an NPM analyzer. If you're using NPM, we can do it from that as well. So we don't need to go all the way to ng build.
So this shows you the bundle, when you build your application. After that, the bundle that goes into your browser, it analyzes that particular bundle. And now let's speak about search engine optimization a bit. When it comes to search engine optimizations, then client-side rendering has more limitations. Not all of your search engines actually render JavaScript. So only Google and Bing, which are major, have a market share in search, can only render JavaScript and index your website. Others like Yandex and Baidu, etc., don't actually render JavaScript. So when it comes to client-side application, the content that they see is just an empty HTML without any information in it. Other limitation that we see is that Google crawls your application in two different steps. So in the first steps, when it tries to index your website, it just indexes your index.html. Like, it just indexes your HTML file without rendering JavaScript. JavaScript, rendering JavaScript is an expensive, computational heavy procedure. So they actually delay it for a second step. So they basically put a different resource to run in later time of, computation. So when that is ready for rendering, then it re-indexes your application. So if you are creating like a time sensitive application, like suppose in this talk I'm going to take an example of a job posting application. So if you want your application, whenever you post a job, you want it to be indexed by Google, then client side rendering has a limitation for indexing it. Or suppose you are making a news application, right, where you are posting news articles and you want to be indexed as soon as possible, then client side rendering has a disadvantage. Other disadvantage is Googlebot uses Chrome 41 to render the JavaScript. So if you don't transpile your JavaScript to ES5 version and you just want to support newer modern browsers, then you wouldn't be able to do it because it wouldn't render your JavaScript. The last disadvantage which client-side rendering cannot do is, since search engines like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn don't render your JavaScript, they just scrape the HTML. So because there is no content in our HTML, you will not be able to optimize, sharing of your web pages on social media.
Or Bing.
Or Bing, or yeah, anything. On Bing, you can probably, because it does JavaScript rendering.
Our site isn't good.
So okay. One approach to resolve this is recommended by Google if you cannot like do server-side rendering, is dynamic rendering, where you serve different web page to a user coming from a browser and a crawler coming to visit your website. So based on the user agent that you see, you basically, if there is a crawler, then you basically use some renderer like Puppeteer or RenderTron, etc., to render it and then send it to crawler. So that is one way that you can do, but it's not as performant as what we are going to discuss. So this is one option. If suppose you are creating an application using AngularJS, which does not have server-side rendering, then maybe you can go for this option.
Is that called static pre-rendering?
Right.
So I've used static pre-rendering successfully with Nuxt, and I guess you said you're doing React now.
Yeah.
They've got.
They have Next.
Do we see static pre-rendering coming for Angular anytime soon?
There is. That's what we are going to discuss today.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So because of the rewrite of the Angular framework, so Angular is no more dependent on DOM. Now we can take Angular application and render it on server. So here is an example where you can take your Angular application and use this Angular/platform server. This is used for rendering your application on server. It provides this method called render module factory, where if you pass your module to it, it will add the capability of rendering on Node server. So what you can do is you can use that and send your content to your web page. You get the rendered HTML on the web page, and then you can bootstrap it using the platform browser. So you get the whole HTML on the web page, and then you basically use platform browser to bootstrap your application. So let's start with the demo time. I hope you guys started with the link in the beginning. You guys can get the GitHub repository from here.
I put the link in the message in the meetup.
Cool. Let me go back. All right.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
You said that pre-rendering is less performant than server-side rendering.
Did I say pre-rendering?
Well, not pre-rendering.
Client-side.
Dynamic rendering.
Yeah, dynamic rendering is basically, it doesn't use, so basically if I show you here, in this scenario, basically you have to like load JavaScript, your HTML, and then JavaScript CSS. It has to be loaded on that renderer, and then your page gets loaded. But in this approach, it's a bit different. It just uses that platform browser which understands your Angular code and optimizely loads it faster than that approach. So let's go back and see what our demo application is.
What you meant to say is that when you have two different servers, it's faster for the one for Google, but for everyone else, it doesn't do anything. Everyone else is still the standard.
Seems more ideal.
It's easy. Yeah, it's easy. It's just that server in the ring does two different things. Server in the ring does two things. It helps SEO, but it speed up as well. As the dynamic stuff doesn't speed up, it just solves the SEO problem. It doesn't speed up the application to it. That will speed up the application.
Right.
Okay.
We'll see the performance improvements in this.
The conceptually I'm not able to get because the data that we display in our applications are tied to a specific user. If you say about it's for me as a user, what my application will see. Are you saying?
Right. So you have to understand this. Like, what are we doing here? So a lot of this search engine optimization of performance. Let's not talk about performance first. Let's talk about search engines, right? So search engines optimization is not for all the applications. It's for client-facing applications, like an e-commerce application, like news platform, or jobs portal in this example, where anyone can go to that page and look at the page. It's not for private pages where a logged-in user can go and see.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand in that particular context, what does it mean for a server-side rendered application?
So here, since you are using Node.js, so basically you will be using some server, right? Express server for that. So if you are logged in, your Express server knows who the authenticated user is, and it can send that content to the front end.
Right, I'm trying to say if I have X number of users, then are you saying pre-render the next number of materialized pages? Right?
Not pre-rendering it, it's on demand. Whenever your request comes, you render it at that time and send it.
And you send all the data, you send it in something called unit.
The-
State, and then you can get
So
it on
you
the
don't
fly.
prepare it and keep it ready.
You can do that, but not for your kind of project that you are discussing. In your type of project, you just, when the request goes to the server, at that time you will render it and send it back.
But that's what we are doing now with our XHR or Ajax or whatnot, right? Where we are getting
Right, so I will show you the performance improvements between your approach and if you use something like Angular Universal. So that's where it comes. So this is an example repository. If you see, I have step 1 to step 8 branches. So we'll go from step 1. We have like 8 different steps. In fact, some of these steps have multiple steps. So to run this application, I have actually went ahead, instead of like building it every single time, I already deployed it to some servers. So if I can show you that this is the start. So actually, let me also.
Nice way to get presentation. So all the steps that you're going to go through, you put a tag on them.
Yeah. So here is the sample application. It's called Dallas Jobs Portal. So here I have fictitious job openings. And if you click on it, it takes you to a job posting page. Here you see it has description, duties, and experience, and then you can like toggle between applied now and remove the application. So it's just a fictitious application. So, and to show you in the application over here, I can show you that I have routing module, and I have 2 different routes where I'm using lazy loading modules. I hope one can see it clearly. So, and I am using a service where I'm like calling a mockable service. So it's a mocked service that returns all the jobs and specific job informations. So the first step that we are going to do is to add Angular Universal. So Angular CLI provides this ng-add schematics where you can use ng-add with a library name and include all the different changes that needs to be required to add that library. In this, I'm showing 3 different commands. The first one is to add using that ng-universal/express engine. So you can use that command if you want to add universal support plus an express server to run that whole application. We are going to use that in this example today. But you can also use something called Nest.js. Nest.js is another server in Node environment similar to Express.js that you can use instead. And if you don't want Express or Nest, you can just generate a universal application and then use some other technology to render your application. Like you can use .NET to render your Angular universal application if you want. So that's not the topic of today, but we are going to look at is Express. So let me go ahead and show you by adding this command. So basically this is ng-add @Angular universal/express engine, and then you also have to provide this client project. So in this case, our project name, if you go and check our Angular JSON, the project name is jobs portal. So basically we are adding Angular universal support for that particular project. So once you run this command, it does all the different actions that it needs to do. It creates all the different file, updates different files for us without us needing to touch any file here. So let us go through all the changes here. And basically it takes your Angular application first, which normally uses app module, which is dependent on browser module for rendering it on browser. It takes that and creates another application which uses app server module. Now app server module includes app module, but it also includes server module, which is required for rendering that application on server. So once I ran this command, it also creates two different, let me open this like this. It also creates two NPM scripts for building your server-side application and then serving the server-side application. So let me just run this because it might take some time before I explain what other changes it made. So while it's running, let's go ahead and see what are the other changes that it made. So basically it took the projects, so the jobs portal output path to be dis/browser instead of jobs portal. And as I said, it also added another project called server where its destination path is dis/server. So it creates two different folders in your destination dist folder if you go and check after the build. And the other changes that it does, it creates this server.ts. And basically this server.ts, you can just see this, it uses Express server. It uses this Express server, and then for all the routes, it basically serves the static files first, and also say that if there is a HTML request, then it creates this engine for you. This is a Express middleware where it basically takes your app server module ngFactory, which comes after the build, and then lazy module map. This is basically a map of all the lazy loaded modules of your application. So we also have it created a Webpack server config. Basically, this converts that server.ts to a server.js so that we can run it. And the other changes that I said was it took the app module, but it added this with server transition, and it created this new app server module. Now it includes app module and a server module. So let's see if our build ran. So it's our application is now running. So if I come here, it looks the same, right? So now you might be saying, oh, what's the difference now? So let's come to my application here, the starting application, and let me right click here and say view page source. So when I do that in my body, I see that I just have app root and there's no content. So when your application loads, you don't have any content on the page, right? But if I come here and to view page source, you see that in the app root, you have all the content. So with just one command, with ng-add command, you got all the capabilities of Angular Universal. So, but we need to do more changes. Let's look at some issues with this. So if I come to this job post page, and I can go to my network, and if I refresh this page, you will see some issue when that application loads. So the issue is that once it loaded, you actually see the content of your home page instead of your job posting page. And the next time what happened is your page got blank, and then your content got loaded.
Yeah.
Right? That is because your server cannot understand this hash in the URLs. Neither your server can understand it, nor your search engines can understand it.
The router doesn't understand it?
The router understands it, but the server, the Node.js application server where it's running, it cannot understand it. Any server language like .NET or anything cannot understand URLs with hash or hash bang. So you need to make sure that you don't have it so that even your search engines needs to understand it, right? If you are creating an application for customers, then you have to make sure that you remove it. So once you remove it, let's go to the step 1. And here, if I come to my job posting page and inspect, and let me go to my network tab and refresh it now. You should be seeing the correct page to be loaded, but the next second, the content goes off but comes back again. Can you understand why this is happening? So if I go back to my diagram of Angular Universal here, you basically loaded your JavaScript, you rendered your HTML and sent it to your browser and then bootstrapped it again. So your content came to the browser with the loaded content, but then again you are making an XHR request. You can verify that by seeing the XHR of the application. So
Because the route is not recognized?
So if I load this again, you should see that the API is being called again. So the API got called on the server and in the browser, so it's redundant. So this is a potential issue, and then we have to solve it. So the next step that we are going to do is we are going to use something called transfer state. So we need to transfer our state from browser to from our server to browser. So we use something like caching mechanism, where transfer state uses a caching mechanism where it saves that API response in the HTML itself and sends it, so that the API is not required to be called again. So instead of me running all the different changes, I'm going to discard all these changes and going to manually go to step 2 from my branches. So the changes that are required to include transfer module.
So how much happened between that and here in reality? I know why you did it.
Now I'm going to show you everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you recap with one? Because it's quick, So my understanding is that the HTML got worked properly, but the JavaScript itself doesn't know about the data that was in the server. So all the data appears on the page, but the JavaScript, the code behind, doesn't have it.
Right.
Right.
Let me put it another way. So your initial HTML had the content, right? So once your web browser got the HTML, it renders it right away with the CSS, right? And then it downloads the JavaScript. And once the JavaScript gets downloaded, it bootstraps your Angular application. And then at that time, it removes the content and gets it back.
Yes.
So that's a potential issue, and we can use transfer state to mitigate that. So we have to include 2 modules here. One module is called browser transfer state module, all right? And then in app server module, we include a different module called server transfer state module. So what this does is it includes this including different modules in different server module and browser module will let you use transfer state differently in both environments. So what I have done is I've also included a HTTP interceptor. So any HTTP request that can go, I'm intercepting it, and I'm calling this transfer state interceptor. And here I'm basically intercepting it. So if you have used Angular, you probably know HTTP interceptor in detail. So what I'm doing I'm intercepting the call, And when the request happens on the server side, so I'm using this method called is platform server. So if you want to know whether your code is running on the server or on the browser, you can use this method where you use platform ID, which is injected in your application. So you inject the platform ID and check whether is it platform server or not. So if it's running in server, then you use this URL key. So you create the state key over here and set that as a to the response. So this is like a local storage, right? Where you have a key and value. So suppose we have that URL state key, which is a URL, and the response of the API is being saved there. So once you save there, the next thing is what happens when it loads in the browser, right? We have to take that cache value and show it. So here what we are doing is we are checking if we have that key. We have that URL state key. And if we have it, we are getting it, removing it from the cache so that when I am using my application and if I go to a different page and come back, I still want that API to happen. I don't want that cached version to be always used. And then I'm returning that response. So let's go and see what happens in the step 2. So if I go to my step 2, and if I show my, if you see the timeline after it's loaded, or it's not showing, if I have to click on refresh probably. So now in the whole interval, you didn't see any flash of content. So let's see the difference in what happened in the code. So if I click on view page source, if I go at the end, you see that it uses the server app state. Now this server app, if you see, it is a, if you go to app module, you will see that we use the server transition with the app ID server app. So if you have multiple applications, you can have different keys and to load it. So you see that it uses this URL key and then the whole response was cached over here. So that is why you didn't see any blinking of your application. Now, in terms of performance, now it's a very, so you don't see a lot of difference in the execution of the application. But when it comes to performance, let me open the incognito mode where you can actually do a better performance testing because you won't have Chrome extensions loading and running on your web pages. So if I go to starts page and also let me open step 1 over here and inspect it, you can audit your performance by going to the audit tab, and I can say what device I want to test on, and I can also simulate the network that I want to. So I'm using the worst thing, like the mobile devices are slow, so use that and with the slowest network, and if you run it, it will run all that different tests we are saying it to test, and then it will return the performance analysis to us. So let's wait for that to complete. Yeah, exactly. It uses Lighthouse. But you don't have to install it because it's already built in into Chrome. Sometimes it is really fast, sometimes it's really slow.
Could you say again where does the platform ID get generated?
So platform ID is, Angular creates that platform ID. So basically, platform browser has that it created that platform ID. So it's specific to that.
But what is the boundary of that ID? Is that the context for the given transaction?
It's a static ID that Angular project creates. So in server you are including @platform / Angular / platform server, right? And then in browser you are including something called @Angular / platform server browser. So you are including two different modules in two different environments. So that will be injecting this platform ID, which are different for each platform.
So if you refresh the page, does it get changed?
As in,
If you load the page again.
no, it's always the same. The platform ID is the same.
Okay, so if we both are accessing, would I get the same platform ID?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's which is bounded to an app instance of the server
Right.
side.
So you see that the performance of this application is measured to be 78, and the first contentful contentful paint was done in 2.2 seconds, and the speed index is 7.4. So let's do the same thing for this server-side application. This is just the step one where we just added that support. And then let's run the same thing here, and you should be able to see the performance difference between both of them. So the difference is the way it's coming. Like, when is the content being rendered? Here in server side, your HTML, initial HTML consists of the data, right? It consists of all the content in it. So you see the content right away. Whereas in client-side rendering, you have to wait till the application bootstraps, and then the API being called, and then the response coming back, and then displaying the content. Right, unfortunately, this is a lot slower on this network.
Also, Google knows time. You can see what you're trying to do.
True.
Got background everywhere.
So yeah. So right away. So the first contentful paint that happened in 1.3 seconds in this case, which is like almost 30 to 40% improvement. So depending on the application, from 2.2 to 1.3 seconds is a lot of difference. So you can use Lighthouse or Chrome auditing tools, which uses Lighthouse to check all the different, performance, accessibility, best practices, etc. of your application. So let me close this, come back to our slides, and so next thing that we are going to see is Preboot application. Now, to display this, I'm going back to my step one. And what I'm going to use is, I'm going to slow down my network by throttling it by slow 3G. And I will reload this page. Okay, let me stop this again.
Just one quick question that I missed. You show where you got the stuff from the transfer state, but you didn't put anything in the transfer state.
I did set it. If you
did set it?
Yeah. So if I go to transfer state, here I'm setting the data.
On where? On the
29th line where I'm highlighting it.
transfer state is set there. Okay, okay, there it is. Okay, okay.
So when you get the response, you are checking whether this is a server or not, and then setting it.
Okay.
So here, pre-booting the application. So basically what I want to do first is, I want to click on this button, applied, and then go to my slow 3G and refresh, so that once it turns green, that means your page got loaded for the first time. So when I click now, your application was not bootstrapped, and then it got bootstrapped, and you came to a new page. So what happened to that click here? You lost that click, right? You didn't capture it, and then you didn't replay it. So Preboot module is basically, Preboot is a library which is created by Angular team that can be used by any other projects too. It can be used by React or Vue. It's not particular to Angular. And you can use this Preboot where it can capture all those events and replay it for you. So if I come here,
Capture also typing.
yeah, it captures typing, etc. So the change that we did for Preboot is just one line change where we included Preboot module, and then we added this Preboot module with configuration, and we added the app root. So with just this change, your application will have that capability. So let me go back to step 2 because it has, if you see here, it says 3 A's. Okay, so I have to go to step 3 there. Let me go to step 3, reload it. Let me go back to online. Okay, now if I click applied and refresh it, go to slow 3G. This is annoying. Okay, let me click on applied, go to slow 3G, refresh it, and when it turns green, I'm going to click it, and you see that because button is an important action, it freezes it. But for like inputs, it will not freeze it. It will let you type it. And once it loads, it replays all that events. So it captures all the events, waits for the application to be bootstrapped and become interactive, and then replays all the events that took place.
Oh, it frees the page. It does that for you. You don't have to
So
worry about
some
it
actions are
by
freezable,
default.
and some actions like input where you are typing, it won't freeze it,
Yeah, because yeah.
right? But if you like type and then click enter, then it will freeze. So because that is a action which is important. So after this step, let's look at pre-rendering. Now pre-rendering is not for all applications. It's only for those applications which does not have a lot of changes to its to its pages. So suppose you have a blog post, a blog application, where you only write your blogs in every single week, right? Not every single day or every hour, where it doesn't have a lot of dynamic data. So in such application, what you can do is, instead of like having a node server that runs, takes the request and then renders it, you can create a whole pre-rendered application, right? And then you can actually host this on a static website, web hosting, right? And then keep it on a static host and then use as an application. So let's go to this step 4. So I'm going to is it step 4? Yeah. So the step 4 changes are, it includes this pre-render.ts. And as I said in my presentation, it uses something called render module factory from platform browser and takes your module, which is your Angular application, and spit out the HTML which you write it to your file system. So when I run this command, so let me build this application for you. Npm run build SSR and npm run pre-render. So once I run this, you will see that it will go ahead and build your server, your client, and then it also pre-renders your application. So here what I'm using here is, I'm creating all the different routes. So here are the static routes of the application, and based on the API of different jobs, I'm also like creating dynamic routes and then looping through the routes and rendering it, basically.
So you decide what page you want.
Yeah, we decide what pages are to be rendered on build time.
And the one which are not rendered will just go. You will just get a quick get them.
Right.
You scroll up there, I saw something. There was a for each.
For each. You mean this for each?
Yeah. That's it. That's where it goes through all the routes, right?
Yeah, this will have all the routes. It will loop through it, and then it will write to that file system again and again. So that command has ran. So let's go to our disk folder. Let's go to browser. And here you don't only see the index.html, but you also see jobs folder and job folder. And I can go and see that it has an index.html, and then this jobs has another folder with all that hierarchy and has a index.html in it.
Are we using Axios just in the step 4, or was it also used in other step 2, step 3?
Axios is in just this step. I'm using that on a node environment.
But why? But why can't what can't you do with the Express that you have to use Axios to accomplish step 4?
Axios is, so basically Express is a server, like a server environment for running in Node.
Right.
So it doesn't have that capability of calling a different API on a different server and getting the data. It just handles your server on your app on Node.
So to accomplish step 4, we have to use Axios replacing.
I mean, you can use Axios or any other HTTP library that is out there. I used Axios because I normally use Axios in my applications. But you're free to use any other library you want.
No, I'm just making a point that this is a technical implementation as a requirement, or is it a choice?
It's my choice, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So without Axios, I can still accomplish step 4.
Right, but to get all the different routes that can be like dynamically generated, like in this application I have jobs, right? So I don't know the job IDs and job titles, etc. And to get that, I'm calling the API and getting it. I can statically write it myself, but who would want that, right? So what we would want is whenever there is a job being added or removed, at that time run this application, which will dynamically get it from your URL, your AJAX call, and get it, right?
You're still talking server side, you're not talking client side,
Right. On your server side, when you are building the application, you will call that API of all the jobs and then create those routes.
And where is that persistent layer in this example?
So you don't have to persist the routes.
Okay, so I see. You are just putting
But what
this
we are
on
doing
the
is we are creating this folders, right? And we are having this index.html being generated for that particular page.
Could you do it by hand with curl and just store the page yourself?
As in,
Can you use curl as just you sell only one page? You could use whatever tool you.
right.
Could you show us some content in the generated index.html?
Sure. So here it's for senior interactive designer position. So if I search for senior, why does it not search? So it has this senior interactive designer already pre-rendered in the application.
So this is exactly what I'm looking to do. I've taken 2 cracks at this before with minimal success.
In your Vue.js application or?
In using Angular.
Okay.
And I had a little trouble with the Angular documentation covering pre-rendering. Did you find a particular resource for learning pre-rendering better than another?
I mean.
You have a running example right now.
Yeah, you have a.
Yeah, I was thinking. I could go to your code and look and see how you did it, but I'm amazed that you were able to.
I mean, different libraries like Express Engine has its own pre-render.ts. You can find it on GitHub like anywhere. Like it's commonly available everywhere.
I checked the universal documentation and it's there.
Yeah, it's not there probably, right? Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, the condition of universal is not very good.
Yeah. So let me go to the next steps. So here, let's come to the search engine optimization parts where search engine basically uses like a lot of different algorithms and it's really difficult for us to understand all of them. The most important being the content, right? Like our content has to be unique and like it has to be human understandable. But today we are discussing in Angular context. So we, instead of going into how we can optimize by using good content, we will focus more on how can we optimize technically, right? So links are really important when it comes to search engine optimizations. Like you can have keywords there, but overloading with keywords is again negative point, but you should always try to use good keywords in your application. Your link can have it, and use like a short and memorizable links so that your users can remember it and come to that application. If you have like long ones, then it's really difficult for it to be shared and used. And it can also show express relationships here. So in this step, in my step 4, I basically I updated my routes. So if I go to my app routing, if you see, I didn't had that before. So if I go to my step 3, you can see that the particular job is just job/ID. So in this step, what I have done is I have included a slug. So a slug is basically a dashed title of that position. So if I go to my step 4, you should, and go to my application, and so let's remove it from slow 3G to online. And then once I go to this application, you see that the URL has a position, which can be readable by machines, etc. And it also shows a relationship between your application. So it can understand, okay, this is a jobs page, and then once you come to this job, it can see that relationship and rank you higher in the search engines. So basically, this is what I'm showing here. So taking that URL which just has ID, which does not have information, but it can go ahead and see the content and understand it, but adding more information is always helpful. So other steps that we can do is we can generate sitemap.xml. Similarly to what we used in pre-rendering, what we can do is we can create a dynamically, we can create a sitemap.xml. Basically, sitemaps are, if I show you, is an XML file which shows all the URLs to your application. You can go ahead and upload this on things like Google Search Console, and Google will basically go ahead and indexes all these web pages. It's not guaranteed, but you still can upload it and give it to Google or any other search engines. So what I have done here is I have used this sitemap.js, where I'm doing the same thing as I did in pre-render, where I created routes and then created all my dynamic routes and created my XML and pasted in my generated folder. So here in my
Why
generate,
use Axios for that?
what is it?
You don't need to use Axios for that.
So basically, I'm calling Axios to get this dynamic route. So if suppose you're adding jobs and removing jobs, right?
Oh.
So I'm calling the API,
Oh, yeah, I guess you know which job you have. Okay.
right? So I'm dynamically doing that here, and then you can create that over here. And the other step that I have here,
But as people do that, they generate sitemap every time, very often like this.
yeah, you have to. So at the minimum, you should like.
Oh, sitemap is very static.
So at the minimum, you should at least give the static routes so that Google will crawl it, right?
Yeah.
Google can crawl it if it comes to that particular page, it can crawl all the application, all the links. But in some cases, you have limitation. Like if you have like hundreds of job posting, and if you have like a button called load more at the bottom, and search engine wouldn't click buttons and see the content. So in such cases, you might want to like provide all the links to it, so it can index it.
A bit like pre-compiling and compressing and all that before you put your
Yeah.
JS on.
Well, that's done before. If someone go and put a new job on your, if someone put a new job on your
Part
site,
of the production
you want to
process.
generate. It's not part of product. It's online. It's on the fly.
Oh.
You generate this thing on the fly, and
Right.
you keep. And so be someone put a job, and now it runs something in the background and put a new file into your S3 bucket.
Right,
That's
So the
interesting.
server
I've
doing
done
this
that.
on the fly.
right.
Wow. Now we know why services.
Where do you run your sitemaps on the deploy or?
So whenever your content changes, you can have a webhook or something that can trigger your sitemap generation and then generate it.
Okay, I'm trying to follow you, right? But I'm just making sure. Is pre-render same as server-side rendering or not?
So pre-render uses server-side rendering, but then what it does is instead of doing it on the request, so Node.js is a
I
server.
saw it. You had the generated
Right.
files, right? So that's what you were.
So Node.js is like a server, right? It's like a ASP.NET server or Java, NetBeans or any server, Tomcat server, etc. So what happens is your request comes to that, and then you either generate the content at that time, or you pre-render it.
I get that point, but all I'm saying is
They are both different.
So-
Server-side rendering and pre-rendering is both different.
So is it a
But-
true statement that you could, without a Node.js server, just using a content delivery network
Yes.
with pre-rendering, get your app there
Right.
and SEO optimized and everything?
So it seems to me that pre-rendering is faster.
Right.
And look at the website we have. Is that there's not the reason why you want server-side rendering is because there is some specific content which gonna vary a lot based on some URL.
yeah, I'm trying to get
But
it.
if I could, like the page we have, like if you don't plug in, it's the same page for everybody.
Right.
So we should pre-render that. So there's no, you see what I mean? If
See, I want to
This-
pre-render it because I don't want to pay for Node.js. I just want to pay for
Right.
like a static hosting.
Which is
I
much
get
cheaper
your
than.
point. All I'm trying to say, what pre-rendering is not same as server-side rendering. What is the difference? Right? Is it like,
So
is it
server-
built on top of
So if your data is too dynamic, then it's not preferred for going for pre-rendering.
No, in your example, right? In your example that you gave, right? Step 4 is pre-rendering.
Right.
Is there any further down in your steps you're going to have a server-side rendering?
So we already did server-side rendering in the first step.
Just
right?
For some static content which is not changing for a day or 2 days. So for those you created pre-rendered pages.
That is in the step 4.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So
But
step 4
And in step 1, I did server-side rendering
you're using what?
They both
using
do the
Angular
same thing.
Universal.
Yeah, they both do the same. They both render the page. The only difference is one render page on demand, and then one you do all your page ahead of time, and then pre-rendering all the time, and then you don't need to do it on demand. You're already done with it.
Okay, so it appears that step 4 is more like the server-side rendering.
Like a
No,
server-side renderer
It-
that you,
Static.
like that you
Generated
run
pages.
ahead of time, like
Yes, like a
before you
build time.
deploy your website.
In
Right.
this example, it's during the build time is creating.
Yeah, before you
Right.
upload your web pages.
In your pre-render example, are you also doing, do you still also have Universal installed and
Yeah.
Universal Server?
yeah,
So-
that's being used
So
to.
they're both used,
They're
Okay.
both using Angular Universal. The only difference is at what time are you doing that rendering? Are you doing it at the build step, or are you doing it on demand when the requests are coming to the server?
And so.
So it really depends on the application that you are creating. If you have an application where you have a lot of dynamic data coming in and out, then you would not go for pre-rendering, because that's like building every time the application data changes.
what if the data did change? Would it just flash on the screen? Like if a price on an e-commerce on an e-commerce site changed, would it just flash the pre-rendered state and then it would
Yeah.
update itself? So it still might be fine.
So I know.
I mean, it might be fine, but it might show.
It doesn't change.
Yeah, if you're using like a slow device, then you might see a different data, and then after few seconds you might see actual data. So if you want that inconsistency, it's up to you, right?
So I have a question. I did all this.
Well, we're doing a question. Can we take a 2-minute break? You can keep asking a question. I'm just I'm going to
All right.
and I don't want to miss anything.
I did all this several times, and it was never as easy as this because I have existing apps, and I tried to upgrade them, and nothing was that easy. No amount of experience would make it that easy in some of these apps. It's just hard. So I got rid of it all. I'm not using Universal. I'm using like RenderTron.
Render
Or-
chunks,
Yeah.
Rendertron,
Yeah. Is that what you were talking about? Is
dynamic rendering,
That's dynamic rendering.
right?
But does it slow down the experience for my users?
So are you using Rendertron for all the users or just the crawler?
Just the crawler.
So that's fine. I mean, but
So why go through
But
all
then
this?
crawlers also, like search engines can looks at different. It has a lot of different algorithms. Like it uses like 200 and above algorithms. So it also uses speed of your application, the time it takes for your page to load. So if your server, like if your Rendertron is taking a lot of time to render it and send it to the crawler, then that is that better, or you want it to be like delivered fast so that you get points on your performance?
I want both, but mainly I need SEO.
Right. So speed is one of the criteria of SEO. Like search engine optimization is like it looks for speed of the website,
The bot speed matters. How much? How fast?
how fast your page comes and loads, right?
To the bot.
Yeah.
Oh, 'cause I
So it
didn't-
looks for the
never
performance,
considered that important.
right? It looks at like a lot of different things. Like you can go to your search console and see for the performance of your application if you want.
But it's a fact. How fast the bot gets the information affects your
Searching, yeah, ranking.
So there are okay. I'll consider other questions.
So can I, for your example, wouldn't that cut into the PWA kind of an application when you said I have a pre-rendered page, but the content has to be reflected back in? Wouldn't that go into
This is
the
getting
problem?
longer.
I'm not talking about
Is this getting longer because I have a lot of? It's okay, right?
It's all right.
Today's my first time hearing about pre-rendering like that.
So the next step that we can do is include a robots.txt file. So whenever your crawler comes and visit your website, it always goes to your domain /robots.txt to see what are the URLs that it cannot access. So if you have private pages that you don't want crawlers to come and visit, Like for example, Angular documentation has this angular.io link, and then it also has next.angular.io. So what Angular does is it allows all the URLs of next.io to be indexed, because they don't want search, when people search on Google, they don't want that URLs to appear in the search. So basically you can use this. You can also include the sitemap URL here if you don't want to submit it to. So this, all the search engines and crawlers can look at this and look at the sitemap if they want. So I also included my sitemap.xml here, and my robot.txt here, and also don't forget to include that in Angular JSON, where you say, okay, you also want that the assets to be your robot.txt and the generated folder where you have the sitemap.xml. So this is also important to be included, right? So let's go to the next step, which is using proper markup. So we have to understand that accessibility is very important for your application. Not only is accessibility important because a lot of different users, like blind users, can access your websites, but also people like colorblind, like me, who cannot differentiate between few different colors, can also has that accessibility and can access your website properly. And since things like screen readers, which blind people use, are actually machines and reading the code, the same constraint also apply to search engines. They actually read the code and sees the content, and then goes to different content and understands it. So when coming to accessibility in a web page, you have to understand that you have to use correct heading tags, right? You have to use h1 followed by h2 followed by h3 in a proper way so that the search engines can understand. And also use links. So okay, links are very important. I can have let me show you what I'm doing here to make you understand here. So in my app.html, I have this h1 tag, which is a very good practice of having a h1 tag at the top and then h2 and h3. But I'm also using router link over here. So this is a not preferred way of doing it, because crawlers don't click on elements or anything. It looks for anchor tags specifically. So this is one thing that we need to change. Other things that I have here is, again, here is a def where I'm using a router link, which is again a wrong practice. So you make sure that you don't do such mistakes. And also here, I'm not using any heading tags. So maybe I can include heading tags for it to understand more. You were saying something?
How do you feel about buttons with hrefs?
Buttons with href are wrong. Like, yeah, you should. It's just the anchor tags that the search engines look for all the links on your page and then goes to those links only.
You have to add href in addition to router link?
No, I mean, if you look at router link, if I show you that this is step 5. So if I show you step 4 right now, if I come here and see my h1, it doesn't have any href or anything because it's a h1 tag. But if I go to my step 5, where I am using the correct tags, and look at here, it added that href automatically, so you don't have to add it. So I'm using here the correct router link on anchors, which is good practice. And if I'm using this Chrome extension, if I open this, because I'm using my h1, h2, h3 in a proper way, it shows this heading map of how your search engines and screen readers can look at the code and understand it in a better format.
Nice extension.
What is it?
That's a nice extension. What about the article and all this HTML stuff?
Yeah, it's always like all those are accessible. So if you use more accessible elements which are understandable by machines a lot, then it's always better. So to give you one example, if I search for what is a good title tag, and you will see it didn't give any search information there. Maybe how to make a good title tag. Okay, so here, if you look, it actually shows this URL with this number of steps. That's because they are using those heading tags in a proper way. So if you use those heading tags in a proper way, that heading tags can be used as an answer by Google. So Google can understand it better and use that as the top results in your searches. So it's very good. So let's go to the next thing, is basically having title and description. As you probably know that your HTML can have a title and meta descriptions on the pages. And if I go to my Angular application, the only place where I have that is my index.html, right? Here I have a title and I don't have any description here. So where does Google or search engines use it? Like it uses that on the home. Whenever you search, you see that the title and descriptions are being used. And if you don't have it in a proper way, then the users wouldn't be optimized for the users to click on. So if it doesn't see a good description, a good title, then users might see it on the results, but they might not want to click it, right? So including that is good, but in our application, dynamic applications, we also want it specific for each page, right? So for my this page, if I have this jobs portal at the top, it's not really great, right? So if it was like system architect position over there, then it would have been better. So if I go to my next step, which is, if I look at this step, is step 6. So if I go to step 6, and see my title, it is very optimized for search engines at the top, system architect Java. Let me also show you that in the code. And title, you can search that as like, so you see the title is there, and then if I check my meta tag, it will have a description, the whole description of that job, instead of nothing to be displayed there.
How do you do that?
So you do that by basically, there is a service that Angular provides called title service and a meta service. So if I go to my job posting, job component, whenever I get that job data, I'm using the title service and meta service to display that data. So I'm updating it whenever the routes are changing. So you can do this on page specific, like the jobs component, or you can, if you have a static pages, right, where you want to do it, you can also create like a routing helper. So here I created a routing helper, which can basically, whenever your routes are changed, and if you can configure it to set those for static routes if you want. So instead of writing in each and every component of the pages, you can configure one service that can do it. Or for some page specific logic, you can also do it in that particular component.
There's a guard or something.
Which one?
Where you're injecting the title.
Yeah, so here I am injecting my title and meta service, which comes from the platform browser. And then I basically set the title for the title, and the meta tag has to be removed and then added. So it basically has the name description, and the content is basically the job description that we have in our API.
Within the route, you put it to your service, your routing service, you put that in a guard or
so you can just inject in your app component. So I'm basically
some sort of interceptor.
I'm just injecting it. So once injecting it in the constructor itself, I'm having that router events where I'm looking for all the route changes and then adding it. So okay, this is good. Like now we have our content like being displayed beautifully on our Google searches. But then what happens if we share our content on Twitter, Facebook, etc.? Now they don't actually look for title. Some of them do look for title, description, etc. But they also have other meta tags that has to be included. Now to add all those meta tags, it's a long steps that you have to do. You can also use these validators to check whether our application is very shareable or not. So let me use this link and let me log in to my account. And I can put my URL here and preview it. Let me also open another one like LinkedIn and test it over here as well. So you see that Twitter says, okay, unable to render card preview directly to you. Like it's not optimized for sharing on Twitter, even though it has a title and a description, right? It has a title and description, but it's not optimized. And then LinkedIn shows Dallas Jobs Portal, even though the title of our application says system, where is it? System architect with the job position, but LinkedIn still shows Dallas Jobs Portal, right? So we can use a third-party service. So I'm basically using a library called ngx-seo. This is created by a person, a freelance developer from Belgium. His name is Sam. So what he did is he created this service where, if I go to my jobs page, so instead of using meta and title service, you can use this library called ngx-seo, which gives a service called SEO social share service. And you can set all the different details that it requires. So if I go to that service, to that method and see what details it wants, it wants as many of things that you can provide from this information. You can provide title, description, image, the URL, type, author, section, published, when was it published and when was it modified. So all this information can be used by those search engines. So once you provide that, so let me just change this to 7 and search it. You should see that it displays it much better. And if I come here and change it, you should see a better view of it. So you see that it shows the content properly. And for the home page, I actually went ahead and also added the image URL. So let's look at how that looks. So let's go and search that. So you see that the image is being displayed there. The difference, let's go and see the difference in the web page itself. Let's see all the different meta tags that it has added. I can inspect it. And then when I search for meta, you see that it has added this Twitter title meta tag, Twitter image alternate text meta tag, open graph image alternate and all the different.
Bigger and bigger.
Right. So it's good for when you are sharing on, not only your social, Facebook, Twitter, but also like services like WhatsApp on phone or some other things. So they use this open graph a lot, but Twitter has its own meta tags somehow. Like they want to be different from others.
Somebody from Microsoft went to work there.
That's the difference. Everybody has their flavor.
Yes, yes.
Pretty back to XP, we go back to the card validator.
Yeah. So you can provide whatever links that you have, and then click on preview. It will show you how it will look when you share it on Twitter.
Again, I thought I lost somewhere the track on why did we start using now.sh?
Now.sh is basically a server, so it's not required. You can deploy it anywhere. I'm deploying it on now.sh.
Okay.
Now is
It
a
has got no relevance with what.
right. It doesn't have any relevance.
You have your slides somewhere in that GitHub.
Sure, I tried like from converting my keynote to PPT, but it's like the worst conversion possible. But yeah, I can give you a PowerPoint presentation, but it wouldn't be perfect because the conversion is not
I
perfect.
just like the bullets you have.
Right. That can be helpful. Yeah, I can provide.
Because for sure I'll have to go
True.
for it or be.
Will
Right.
you be sharing the PPT as this?
Yeah, I can share it, but it wouldn't be perfect as my keynote. But if you have Mac, I can send keynote maybe. Yeah. So the last part of this talk is structured data. So structured data is something like you can put more data to your application. You can add micro data to your page so that your search engines can understand your content in a better way. To look at how this JSON-LD might be used, there is a link over here which you can go and see the different Google search gallery that they use. So here is an article where you provide this more meta information about this, and it shows the block, it shows the the image of your organization, and then if I go down, this is a book. Here is a breadcrumb where it shows a breadcrumb below your title. Here is a recipe where it shows the time, how much it takes to prepare that recipe, and the calories and the ratings. All this different information. What we are interested in is in job posting. So let's go to a job posting card over here. So here is a thing that will be used by card. So when you search on Google, it will show you in this type of preview if you are using JSON-LD, if you're using structured data. So it will show you the username, the name of the position. It will show the type of the position, when it was posted, etc. It will know that information. So let's search for one position. So if I search for software developer positions near me, I have this application. So I can click on this and open a whole application where I can create alerts, and Google will send me alerts whenever the jobs is posted and if that applications are optimized.
Basically, you can go directly into your application where that
Right.
decision.
So I can click on apply on Glassdoor. So it will show you apply on your application, and you will land on that application. So you can look at that search gallery to see all the different search. It has local business, etc., that you can optimize for. So you can save this position, you can apply it. So let's see how you can add it. So it's like a JSON that you have to inject on the page. So instead of us creating it, again, we'll go to step 8, and we'll use the same ngx-seo for doing that. So if I come here in my ngx-seo, now I'm also including JSON-LD service. I'm injecting it and I'm creating this object which has a key for job posting, and I'm sending more information. So if I show you here, not only I'm sending title, description, etc., but I'm also giving it employment type, who is hiring, where is the location of the job, when is this job posting valid till, etc., to this application. So now if I can also test this. So Google also provides a tool for testing it. So I can come to this application. I can open my step 8 URL. Let me copy this, and if I paste it over here and run the test, what it's going to do, it's going to fetch the page, see the JSON-LD, and then it shows you what structured data has been seen on this page. So it says that it saw the job posting. You can click on preview to see that job posting. So your job posting will be seen here, where it shows the position type, the time when it was posted, etc.
This icon and stuff like that. So there's some rendering there. Can you put some rendering there, or it's just like a very specific format you can use?
So if I go back to my search gallery and then go to jobs posting, job posting. Let me scroll. Okay, it has space. So when I click on get started, you can see all the information that you want to submit. So it has some required fields and some are optional. So as many information that you can provide will be good. So here is the required fields like data, posted, description, hiring organization, and these are some recommended properties that you can see. So as long as you provide that information, like you can see based on that the logo will be shown, and etc., etc. So to see how it comes in on your application, let's go to that step 8. And if I inspect it, I should be saying, let me search LD plus JSON. You should see a script tag, and your whole JSON that you created, job posting, is coming here, and search engines will look at this, and all like this is using a schema.org schema. So basically this is used by a lot of different search engines, not just Google, but others like Bing, etc. also use it. So these are very important things that you can do to optimize it better.
So schema.org has an official layout.
Right. So I heard like sooner they are going to have something called Speakable, where you can say which sections of your website answers your questions. Like when you speak on Google Home or stuff and ask question, you can say what part of your page has that answer to that question. So Google Home can learn from where the answers could be and can read from your web page and tell you from where it got the answer from.
So basically, but you don't record it. It's going to read it. You don't record it. It's going to read it itself.
Read it, and then you can say which CSS selector has that answer to that question. Like, so.
Yeah, that's just great. But it's static. Can you make the insert that I make? Like, was it?
It's just in beta version now, so like we don't know what are the capabilities. I know what they can do is basically you can say apply for the job and it will go ahead and click on it and do stuff like that. So
cool.
Yeah, we don't know what extent they can go with that, but it's something which your website can link to, like Googlebot or some machine learning algorithm where you can connect it and work with.
Sounds like Google and Amazon are in a discussion who's going to have
Right.
this platform.
Well, if Google put that as a standard on the page, Amazon's going to use it. Of course, if it's there.
True.
Yeah.
So the advice that at the end that I would give is never stop. Performance and search engine optimizations are like sports, so always improve it and get better. You can use something called bundle budgets that you can add to your Angular CLI application. You can say if your bundle gets larger than this site, then throw an error and make sure that performance is in your budgets.
Yeah, we did that. Sounds like it's long like that. We always keep voting for the extension.
So these are other tools like that you can use to monitor your application. Here is Angular, Google Analytics. There's Speed Curve and Web.dev where you can like periodically see the changes in your performance and accessibility, etc. You can audit your application by using this mobile friendly test. Your web page being user responsive is also good for search engines because they also look for mobile friendliness of your application. So that's like giving points to that application. They penalize if your application is not responsive or it's not HTTPS served. So all these are important, like all the security measures and performance has to be there in the application. And you can use something like Lighthouse to test your application and improve it. This is one example that a web page test that I did. And you can see that of all the steps that I did here, from step 1 to step 8, last one is the progressive web app that I converted this application into progressive web app. But you can see that your client-side render is much, much slower than your server-side rendered application.
Nice. So the progressive web app is number 1. The PWE is number 1, but the PWE is the first time you render, or is it?
So that's progressive web app is additional to server side. So I added this progressive web app on top of the server side.
Yeah, but this is the first time it's going to be the big deal.
Yeah, that's the first time.
The first,
yeah.
Even the first time it's faster.
Yeah.
Imagine the second time it's going to be way faster.
Right.
Wow. So
But PWA is still client side, right?
No, but I am adding server side rendering and then on top of it I'm adding. So you can use Google, Search Console. So basically, it not only does performance analysis over time, but also gives you alerts whenever a drastic change happens in your search engine ranking or indexing. And at the end, I would thank every one of you to have patience and listening to my talk.
It was really good. You know what? Usually it's me for the presentation. Yours is much better than mine.
Thank you.
Could you show your GitHub URL again, please?
Yeah.
Sure.